Hi, John Morgan here with the Keep Growing podcast. Before I get started with this episode, I wanted to announce something special. This is the next to last episode for our first season. Back when I originally planned the podcast, I decided to use a seasonal approach. That way I can produce episodes in the slow season here at Bob's to release during the peak of gardening season, our busy time. Now it's time for me to start planning episodes for the next year. This is where you come in. I want to know what you think about the podcast and where you would like to see it go. If you head over to our show notes for this episode at bobsmarket.com/keepgrowing, you'll find a link to a short survey. But here's the awesome part. If you fill out the survey and add your name and address, I'll send you a small gift. I have enough for the first 25 entries. Then, during the final podcast of the season, I'll announce one winner who will receive an extra special prize. A Bob's Market tumbler, which I think I'm obligated to say is the greatest of all beverage vessels. Anyhow, let me know what you think. Prior to launching this season, I had a ton of unknowns. Would people in my industry be willing to be interviewed? Do I have the know-how to pull it off? What will the response be like? I actually recorded and tested 3 different versions of the first episode. It's kind of like starting out as a new gardener. You just have to jump in and figure out the finer details along the way. As with this season, I want to get as many opinions as possible so I can bring you the best podcast possible. That way, we can help it keep growing. Alright, so in this episode, I want to give you a crash course in starting a garden from scratch. We've covered some of the basic principles this season, and talked about planning in the last episode. Now, as Yoda would say,
you must unlearn what you have learned.
What? Yes. Stick with me here. You see, Luke knows that he can't lift an X-Wing because it's too heavy. And Yoda has to teach Luke that what he knows is incorrect. He's learned that he can't lift the X-Wing. I mean, look at that thing. It's huge. And Yoda tells him to unlearn this. Yoda prods Luke by telling him to believe that he can and use all his effort, not some partial effort. What I'm getting at is that gardening takes commitment and effort. You can spend all the time in the world reading about it or listening to podcasts, but it's learned by doing. Are you going to lift an X-Wing on your first attempt? Nope. Neither did Luke. Let's leave the swamps of Dagobah now and head to a patch of land where you want to start a garden. When it comes to starting a garden or flower bed from scratch, there's a few basic steps. It's also handy that this is the end of the season, because now is the perfect time to prepare for next year. Specific garden or flower bed types aside, you generally want to choose a spot that gets plenty of sun and is well drained. The vast majority of plants will do fine in this type of environment. The first step is to clear the land, either by removing the sod or by smothering it. If you're doing a landscape bed, one of the easiest options is to smother the grass and weeds over the winter with cardboard. Simply put down a layer of cardboard and cover it with a thick layer of mulch, leaves, or straw. Just make sure the straw is seed-free. This will not only kill the grass and weeds, but it will also help start the process of amending the soil. This process takes a few months, so it's great to do this now, so it can be doing its thing during the winter. Then, after the grass and weeds are dead, and the cardboard is broken down if you use that method, it's time to till. For small areas, this can be done using a shovel. But for larger plots, break out the big guns. Personally, I use a Troy-built tiller. That was my grandpa's. And it's actually nearly as old as I am. On the flip side, you can adopt a permaculture gardening system that relies on the heavy use of mulch and other natural methods instead of tilling. We'll definitely cover permaculture in future episodes. Next comes planting. This is also where knowing your hardiness zone and the first frost dates comes into play. As we covered in the seed and grow light episodes, some plants can be direct sown into the soil. And if you're starting a vegetable garden, this is a great choice for beans, corn, squash, and many other veggies. Be sure to follow the instructions on the seed pack for best results. If you're transplanting, no matter what size the container is, from a small seedling to a 1-gallon pot, the process is pretty much the same. Start off by digging a hole the same depth as the root ball and roughly twice the diameter. Then place the plant in the hole and fill around it level to the base of the stem. I like to cover it with a very thin layer of garden soil, just to kind of help lock it into place. Finally, give it a good watering to help it settle into place and start the process of establishing itself. A common thing to look out for, though, is transplant shock. To me, this is a common pitfall with new gardeners, because you've never experienced it. Transplant shock happens as a result of damage to the roots. This results in reduced vigor. This happened to me with my cabbage plants this spring. It was almost like somebody had paused my plants in the garden. It took a couple weeks for them to start producing new leaves. Another form of transplant shock can be the result of not watering them enough when they're transplanted. This can easily happen during summer months when the surrounding soil is already dry. The result is a wilted, wimpy plant the next day. That's really all there is to it. Sure, we can get into fancy stuff like using row covers to extend the growing season, planting cover crops, and so much more. And we'll definitely get into that in future seasons. So to circle back to the beginning, let me know what you want to learn about in our next season. Our gardening wisdom this week, of course, comes from Yoda. And he says,
Try not, do, or do not. There is no try.
Until next time, may the Force be with you, and keep growing. If you're listening on iTunes, Google Play, or other platforms, be sure to give us a review. You can also learn more about bulbs through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and more. If you want to contact me directly with questions, comments, or smart remarks, shoot me an email at keepgrowing@bulbsmarket.com. The music in this week's episode is by Nathan Wyvern. Copyright 2018, Bulbs Market and Greenhouses, Incorporated.